That's what I like, a really good pint of great British beer. Welcome to the Best of British. We're going to be looking at 30 classic great British pubs. Now, I'm Kate Bellamy, and with my distinguished colleagues, Johnny Morris and Roy Bailey, we're going to be touring around the country to discover 30 of the finest pubs in Great Britain. Johnny, I've just discovered that there are about 70,000 pubs.
Only half enough.
You think so?
Yes, yeah.
So we obviously like going to pubs. What is it, do you think, that the British public in particular like about the good old-fashioned pub?
Well, the British public are a very sensible public. That's why we started public houses. They knew what they wanted, they knew what was right, and they developed them slowly over the years. And there's no other country in the world that has got public houses in the same way that we have. And what British public like about pubs is very, very variable. And now they've got at their disposal a wonderful variety of all sorts of pubs that have adapted themselves through the ages to suit different classes of the population. And I think that's quite brilliant. The way that there are some pubs that are a bit what they call iffy, but not so very many. There are not many bad pubs, are there, Roy?
No, not many. I think the worst of pubs is better than no pub at all.
That's right.
As you
really?
say, it's a great British institution. It's an institution that has grown up because of the British desire to have somewhere where we can get together and be sociable, meet our fellow men, relax and drink probably the best drink in the world, beer. And the pub fulfills all those requirements.
Now, I said at the beginning, we've actually selected 30 to look at. How on the earth did we sort of get down from 70 to 30? What are the criteria, do you think,
You mean
that make a good...
70,000?
Yes, sorry, 70,000, that make a good pub?
It's a number of factors, and a lot of it depends on the point of view of the person doing the selection. You ask 10 people to produce a list of classic pubs, and they'll give you different lists. For me, I think a classic pub depends on the character of the building, the architecture, the atmosphere, the location, the history, the way it's, the decor inside, the type of beer, the quality of the beer it's served. But I think perhaps most of all, it's the quality of the licensee, the landlord, that makes a really good
without
pub.
a doubt. A bad landlord can empty a pub in a fortnight.
Yes.
And it takes a good landlord 2 years to build that reputation back up, doesn't it?
Well, we're going to be visiting 30 classic pubs. We'll also be going to take a look at 3 breweries, a micro, a medium independent and a national, and we'll also be popping into Camera's Great British Beer Festival. So I really think we ought to get on our way and stop at our first pub, which is in England. Or is it Wales? Actually, the Ritz Benson is just in England. The Welsh border is marked by a stream running through the gardens of the pub. The Ritz Benson dates back to the 14th century and was a major port of call for the Welsh mule drovers, leading their herds along the Wye Valley to the markets at Hereford. There are 5 views of the Wye Valley and the Black Mountains from the inn itself and from its terraces. The larger of the pub's 2 bars has a large open stone fireplace and is well adorned with gleaming copper and brass. Leading off the main bar is the smaller Locals Bar, where you can eat superb meals, drink good beer and play a variety of pub games, including table quoits. In the main dining room, which overlooks the gardens, you can feast on a mouth-watering a la carte menu. Just for good measure, the Ritz Benson has an additional smaller dining room and also a family room. dinner, you'll probably be ready to stay the night in one of the Ritz Benson's tastefully furnished and traditionally decorated rooms.
This is Crockers Folly, but it isn't really a folly. You see, most follies were given their name because they were buildings created by eccentrics who built romantic towers and grottos and all sorts of things. Mr. Crocker built this folly, as it was called afterwards, but it was not so much a folly as being a creation that suffered from jolly bad luck, because Mr. Crocker thought that the Marylebone station was going to be built just here, and it never happened. He built this folly to accommodate the passengers from the railway station. It didn't happen. Come and have a look at it. From the sweeping marble bar counter that greets you to the elaborately moulded ceiling, this Victorian pub is an architectural masterpiece. To the right of the main bar is a less opulent room where a variety of pub games are played, including bar billiards. Peter, Regent Inns have seemed to have picked these ancient edifices and follies to operate as going concerns. Why do you do that?
Because we're a very traditional company.
Yeah.
And we like the traditional values, and we think the English hostelry is something which should be treasured. And wherever possible, we get hold of listed buildings and improve them and bring them back to their original glory.
Yeah, because you see, you're really asking for trouble, aren't you? You've got so many different societies and rules and regulations that prevent you from doing what you commercially would like to do, and you can't do.
It was a very vexing time, and it normally is a vexing time when we're trying to restore these premises. But I think in the end it's worthwhile.
It is worthwhile. Now look at us sitting in this bar now. Now for me, this bar is the right height, you see.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't originally intended as a bar, was it?
No, this was originally going to be the hotel counter reception.
Was it? Yeah.
And I know it suits you very well, but it's slightly too low. That's probably why I'm sat down now.
Yeah, but it's a lovely Italian marble bar, isn't it?
It's the most beautiful bar.
And all this has been preserved?
Yeah.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Johnny.
Delicious roast beef is just part of the extensive menu served up in the spacious and ornate third room of Crockers Folly.
Our next pub, the Birch Hall Inn at Beck Hole. The village is tucked into the North Yorkshire moors, close to where Ellerbeck and Westbeck meet to form the Esk. Decorating the whitewashed rough stone walls is an ancient painting of the nearby Thomas and Foss waterfall. The middle room of the pub is a sweet shop, and behind the shop counter are a set of hand pumps. Beer pulled in the shop is then served through a small hatch to the thirsty customers waiting in the larger of the Birch Hall's two other rooms. The pub was first granted a licence in 1857, although the title deeds to the property go back to 1714. On the other side of the shop is a minute bar packed full of curiosities. Over a pint, Peter Frost, a brewer who's been providing beer for the Birch Hall Inn, told us about his beer, Curate's Downfall.
So we started producing our own beers from June the 1st of 1993, basically just for sale originally at the one pub. But we've found that demand has been so great for the beers that we've expanded to other places throughout Yorkshire. And in expanding the business in this way, we were fortunate enough to come into contact with Colin Jackson and start selling the beer through the Birch Hall Inn. After Colin had approached us when he was short of beer one weekend. The Birch Hall Inn is exactly the kind of place that we're looking for to sell our beers in, because it's a traditional English pub that serves traditional English beer, which is what we produce.
Our next port of call, and I mean that quite literally, is the Pandora Inn at Restronget Creek near Falmouth. This remarkably fine old inn dates back to the 14th century and can be reached by either land or sea. Right up so that I can get out. This is the pub's own pontoon. Overnight mooring fees are waived if you use the pub's restaurant. And after all that messing about in boats, that sounds like an extremely good idea. The inn's name derives from HMS Pandora, a ship dispatched from nearby Falmouth to capture the mutineers from Captain Bligh's bounty. Not surprisingly, the pub has a very nautical feel about it. Each of the 3 bars in the Pandora is loaded with maritime memorabilia. Adam Love from St Austell's Brewery joined me in the Bounty Bar.
Adam, this is a splendid pub in a splendid setting, but I wasn't aware that it was a St Austell tied house. I thought it was a free house.
Well, it was for many years. In fact, we used to own it until the 1920s, and one of my perhaps short-sighted forebears decided the Pandora didn't fit in with our portfolio and sold it for £500, I think, in the early 20s, and then we bought it back at a considerably higher sum in the 1980s, as we've always admired the Pandora Inn, and are now very proud to have it.
And as a traditional brewery, you brew traditional beers like this HSD from traditional ingredients.
Yes, we do. Hicks's Special Draft is one of our best-known ales and has become renowned throughout the country for its traditional qualities.
Yes, it's a splendid beer. It's got a light nose, but a really nice, rich malty taste to it, and gently hopped in.
Yes, that's the dry hop, which you can certainly pick up, and it's got a very good flavour, I agree.
Upstairs, away from the activity and atmosphere of the traditional inn, top-class food is served in the intimate Captain Edwards room, and also in the adjoining Andrew Miller restaurant.
No visit to Britain's glorious Lake District is complete without a stop at our next pub, the Mason's Arms at Cartmel Fell. The pub is named after the Kendal Freemasons, who used to meet here in secret when Freemasonry was illegal. A converted farmhouse, the Mason's Arms has two splendidly old-fashioned bars with stone floors and low timber beam ceilings. The pub is renowned for its excellent food and its remarkable range of beers. The Mason's Arms stocks more than 130 different bottled varieties, covering almost every corner of the world. The pub also rotates the real ale served from the 4 hand pumps, as well as providing a damson beer and 2 traditional beers, brewed by the Lakeland Brewing Company, which landlord Nigel Stevenson operates from a garage at the back of the pub.
Right, this is the brew house of the Lakeland Brewing Company, which was initially set up to supply just the Mason's Arms, but we now do supply other people. If you come inside, I can show you a few things about the brewing process, because we're actually brewing today. This is the mash tun, which is where the malted barley is mixed with hot water, and at the moment we're sparging with my wife's lawn sprinkler, the best thing we found for the job. It's then pumped into this copper here, which is where it's boiled up with the hops. This is a beer we made about a week ago. It's still just fermenting. The last part of the fermenting process is going on now. It's Amazon bitter. We make about one of these tanks is about 700 litres of beer.
Brewery in Netheravon, Wiltshire, was originally established in 1984 and is a fine example of a classic microbrewery. The owner is Stig Anker, an educated brewmaster from Denmark, who bought the brewery in 1993. With a staff of only 2, Stig has a hands-on approach to the brewing process, which begins by loading in the malt for milling. From the mash tun, where the crushed malt is mixed with hot water to extract the sugars, to the copper, where the resulting sweet wort is boiled, the variety of equipment used is very typical of a microbrewery. You won't find many large breweries using direct burners to heat the copper. The hops which give the beer its bitter taste are added to the wort as it comes to the boil. And at Bunce's they are stirred in by hand. The boiled wort is then cooled and pumped to the fermenting vessels, which each hold 10 barrels or 360 gallons, before finally being put into casks. This process is called racking. The advantage of running a microbrewery is that you are never far from your home, in Stig's case right next to the mill room above the brewery. And just look at the views. I asked Stig what attracted him to the British brewing industry.
The whole English way of drinking beer, having all these pubs, where that's a whole culture. If you compare it to the Danish way of drinking beers, the Danes, they only go to the supermarkets, buy cheap beers and go home in front of their television and sit drinking it.
Bunce's have a brewing capacity of 60 barrels a week, and its cask-conditioned beers are delivered to around 40 free trade outlets within a radius of 50 miles. Bunce's bestseller is the strangely named Pig Swill, but Stig also brews a best bitter and an excellent dark ale called Old Smoky.
This fire too wonderfully draw, don't it? And so it should. It's a wonderful old fireplace, and it's in the Fleece at Bretforton near Evesham. And it originally was an old medieval farmhouse, and it was made into a pub in 1848, and it's remained pretty well intact ever since medieval times. And the late landlady, Lola Taplin, used to sit in this rocking chair here, and we're very grateful to Lola because she's produced a pub which she considered to be her home. And here's a very nice old 15th century door, plenty of ventilation, natural squeak, just right. I spoke to the landlord, John Griffiths, about Lola Taplin, and on her death she left it to the National Trust.
Yes.
And so they are the sort of custodians of it.
That's right, yes.
And they look after it in the way that she dictated.
Yes. Yes, she left a certain amount of rules in her will which still stand today at the Fleece. No packet foods.
What, no crisps?
No crisps.
No nuts?
No nuts.
No porky scratchings?
No porky scratchings.
Nothing like that.
No.
You're not allowed to sell it?
No. Music in the pub, like jukebox and things like that, that's barred. And public telephones, cigarette machines, nothing like that. Which I think she was a very clever lady at the end of the day, because you go into these pubs today and it's you can't have a conversation like we're having a conversation now. All you hear machines and jukeboxes going all the time.
Mm. In other words, she wanted it like her home.
That's right, yeah.
It was her home.
That's right.
And you were privileged to come in, I suppose.
That's right, yeah, you were.
Well, this is the old farmhouse kitchen, and this is the famous collection of pewter that was collected by Lola Taplin, the late landlady. They are magnificent pewter chargers, as you can see, tremendous size, and legend has it that Oliver Cromwell left this pewter in this area in return for gold and silver with which he could pay his armies. Well, that's only a legend, but the pewter certainly is not. It's a magnificent collection.
Situated just off Princess Street in Edinburgh is the magnificent Cafe Royale, a masterpiece of late Victorian decor. The Cafe Royale has two distinct sections. This is the oyster bar, offering top-class cuisine in impressive surroundings. From the oyster bar, you step into an equally impressive marble-floored room, which has a handsome large island bar. To one side of the bar, there are 6 tiled murals depicting famous inventors and innovators. People visit the Cafe Royale not to drink or stay, but just to savour for a moment the elegance of this Victorian era.
This is the Exeter Ship Canal, the oldest inland waterway in the United Kingdom. It was built in the 16th century to carry cargo vessels up from the English Channel to the city behind me. Nowadays it's used mainly for pleasure craft. These double lock gates give their name to our next pub, where I intend to sample a classic British ale. The Double Locks today is the creation of Jamie Stewart, an ex-farmer who many regulars believe should be in line for any Landlord of the Year award.
Morning, Roy.
Morning, Jamie.
What can we get you today?
Pint of Royal Oak, please. Ah, look at that.
There we go.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Cheers. Ooh. They certainly brew some good beer in Dorchester.
Yeah, well, they've been doing it for a long time now. They say that they've been brewing there since all early 1800s, and the family that are still there now have been there all about 1870s, something like that. So they should have got it right by now.
Yes, that's very much Thomas Hardy country around there as well, isn't it?
They say that he lived fairly close, and he was a great friend of Alfred Pope, who was one of the ex-chairmen, I think. So they've got it about right, I think.
Yeah. I love Hardy's description of Dorchester beer in one of his novels. It is of the most beautiful colour the eye of an artist in beer could desire, luminous as an autumn sunset. I think that's a wonderful description.
That's a fair description.
Tastes wonderful too.
But it turns out a good product.
Yes. They also brew that Hardy Ale, which is one of the strongest beers in the country, and
It is, yeah, I've got some
matures for about 25 years, I believe.
That's the one you're talking about.
That's it, yes.
And each bottle's individually numbered.
1991, so that's not really finished fermenting yet, has it?
Not yet, no. It needs a few years. But it's good strength. It livens up a wheat beer.
A central corridor with a serving hatch from the bar separates the three rooms at the pub. The overall atmosphere at the Locks is more like a club than a pub. The staff are efficient, relaxed and friendly, and the hum of talk and laughter from the customers is ever present. It isn't only the beer that's superb at the Double Locks, the food is absolutely excellent. Very big portions, and the atmosphere here is wonderful.
Fabulous bird, the ostrich, has given its name to this fabulous inn, the Ostrich. Now, why the ostrich? I mean, ostriches never lived here, they're miles away. But there were fabulous birds in this area, and they were called in those days cranes. They were probably herons. And so it got a mixture, because the ostrich was well known all over the world. It got a mixed up thing, and the crane became an ostrich, and so there we are. It doesn't matter very much. The other theory is that a lot of pilgrims and travellers and ambassadors and regal people used to pass this way on their way to Windsor Castle, and it was known as a hospice. And so probably there's another corruption from hospice to ostrich. What does it matter? A fabulous bird, a fabulous inn, the third oldest inn in the British Isles. So let's beam up on some of its wonderful architecture. The pub is situated in Colebrook, 3 miles due east from Windsor Castle, and was founded in 1106 by Milo Crispin. The Ostrich, as it now stands, dates from about 1500. Well, this chap should know.
asked landlord Graham Carmichael about the Ostrich's most famous or infamous innkeeper, a man called Jarman. And Mr. Jarman got himself fairly rich by murdering a lot of people here.
Yeah, what he used to do actually was he'd get the single travellers. As this was the main London to Bath Road, he'd get a single travellers travelling, stop off here to stay, maybe stay down in the pub, have a few drinks. Mr. Jarman would, and his wife would maybe make a fuss of those who they thought were the richest, the wealthiest, and to get them drunk and invite them to stay in what was called the Blue Room, which is shown up there. Once they got them in the room, they'd be fast asleep, hungover. They'd pull slats from the bed, and the bed would tip up, and the body would fall into a vat of, well, whether it was boiling liquid of some sort, whether it was water, or, depending on how gruesome we want, it could have been boiling fat.
Yeah.
And our imagination can tell us the rest.
Yeah, because there was not a murmur, not a yell, not a squeak, not a...
Just a splash.
Just a splash. Well, I've had a very nice lunch, you know, Graham. Could you hook me up for the night?
Yeah, well, let's see your wallet.
Head in Newton, just south of Cambridge, dates back to 1680 and stands at the junction of 5 roads. King George V and the German Kaiser enjoyed a drink under this tree just before the outbreak of World War I. The pub was originally a farm, brewing ale as a sideline. Due to the quality of the beer, it was soon turned into an alehouse for the general public. The Queen's Head hasn't really changed over the centuries and today attracts a mixed and varied crowd, as landlord David Short explains.
Every pub, I think, should not be dominated by one group. Everyone should be able to meet people on equal ground from all walks of life and get on together, and that's what we try and do here. We pride ourselves on conversation and fun.
This goose used to reside in the public bar, and rather than putting it on the menu when the bird passed away, it now has pride of place on the pub wall. After an exhausting game of table skittles, you may like to sample the delicious homemade soup or the large platters of meat or cheese. Simple and superb. This is a classic medium-sized family brewery, Arkell's of Swindon. They've been brewing here now for over 150 years, and it's still run by the descendants of the founder, John Arkell. I'm here today to meet his great-grandson, Peter, who's chairman of the company. But first of all, I'm going to be shown around the brewery by the head brewer, Don Brasher. Morning, Don.
Good morning, Roy.
Am I in time for the first mash?
Certainly are.
Oh, good. What are you brewing today? We started our tour in the mash tun room. This is situated just under the mill, where the essential raw material for the beer, malted barley, is crushed to form a coarse flour known as grist. The grist is mixed with hot water, or as it is always known in the brewing process, liquor. The mixture is run into the mash tun and left for up to 2 hours. The strong sugary wort produced by this process is drained and pumped to the copper. While we waited for the wort to be heated in the copper, I took the opportunity to speak to Peter Arkell, the company chairman. And it's not only the Arkell's family who have a long tradition here, it's the people who work for you as well, isn't it?
From the very beginning, actually, and we've got 3 and 4 generations of people here whose fathers and grandfathers worked at the brewery.
And it was your great-grandfather who founded it, Farmer John Arkell.
John, commonly called Honest John in those days, and he was a tremendous chap, actually. He first of all, when he was a young man during the farming depression, he went out to Canada and formed a settlement there. And then I think he got a bit itchy and wanted to marry. Sent for his fiancée, and she took one look at Canada and said, no way. So he came back here, thank goodness.
Thank goodness, to the benefit of all beer drinkers in the Wiltshire area.
Yes, it certainly was.
Well, long may it continue, Peter.
Thank you, Roy.
I returned to the copper room in time to see the hops being added. Arkell's used traditional British varieties of Fuggles and Goldings from the hop fields of Hereford, Worcester and Kent. The characteristic flavours of real ales come from the resins and oils in the tiny glands of the hop cones. These dissolve when they are boiled with the wort for just over an hour in the copper. The hopped wort, as it is now called, is then strained and cooled to around 17 degrees centigrade before being run into the fermenting vessels. Yeast is now added, which will turn the natural sugars in the hopped wort into alcohol. The yeast also adds its own character and flavour to the beer. The beer is fermented for up to 5 days before being wrapped into metal casks. At this stage it is called green beer and now has to rest and mature. Finings are added to clarify the beer, but some traces of yeast still in the beer produce carbon dioxide, giving it a sparkle and flavour. Arkell's beers can be sampled in the excellent visitors centre, complete with a 19th century steam engine and memorabilia of Swindon's railway heritage. After 14 days from the mash, the cask-conditioned beer is now ready for delivery to its final destination, the pub. I joined Peter's son, managing director James Arkell, in the Kingsdown Inn, just across the road from the brewery.
Now, James, Arkell's have been going for 150 years, and they look well set to continue for another 150. What's the secret of your success?
Well, besides the beer, it's where we sell the beer. And here we are in the Kingsdown Inn, which is the brewery tap, pub right opposite the brewery, which would have been one of the very first pubs that my great-great-great-grandfather bought. And in those days, he bought pubs really within reach of where his horse would take him, probably where he fell off his horse, I suspect. And often they were bought in small packages of 3s and 6s when estates were being sold. And for many years we had 40 or 50 pubs, and they were all within what I call his own hunting country, and not really far beyond those boundaries in those days.
How many pubs do you own at the moment?
Well, we've got 88 licensed premises now, and really in the last 20 years we've actually started buying more pubs, because really my father particularly, in his time as chairman, he's been renovating them, rebuilding them, and building kitchens and loos up to the standards that we have to have now. So we've only really been able to just recently go forwards and purchase more pubs, which we're doing slowly but surely, but that's what we have now.
So the way forward for Arkell's looks very promising.
I hope so, I hope so. We're working hard at it, and I'll drink to that.
I'll drink to that too.
Right, cheers.
In central Salisbury was built in 1320 to offer sustenance to the workers engaged in building the nearby church. Indeed, throughout the centuries, the pub has had close connections with the church. This room, once used by bishops, is known as the House of Lords and overlooks the bar below. Gruesomely, a mummified hand holding 18th century playing cards was discovered in the pub, suggesting that it may have been a secret drinking den for church officials.
Sari Gamp whose favourite phrase was, "Drink fair, Betsy," and it's at the Lamb Inn around the corner. The Lamb in Lamb Cundit Street was built in 1729. The building is a mixture of styles. Some 18th century parts remain, but was heavily improved during the 19th century and more recently in 1959. Good evening. Can I have the usual, please? The usual is what you have here, and you can have it in... Ah, there it is. The usual. This is a lovely device known as the snob screen, because if you were somebody, or else you thought you were somebody, and perhaps your coachman or your butler were in a less salubrious part of the public house, you could use this snob screen, order your drink, and put it back, and they wouldn't know that you were here. Internationally renowned, the Lamb draws an interesting mixture of customers. Whether these actresses and members of royalty featured on these 1890 photographs are regulars, well, I don't know. What I do know is that it's time for a drink and a chat with landlord Richard White. Oh, look at that.
No, that's nice stuff. That's very good.
Now this is the special.
This is special. This is our special bitter, which is stronger than the other bitter, which is popularly called ordinary. But as our chairman insists, there's nothing ordinary about our bitter, you know.
No, it strikes one as being a little thin to start with, but it's got a very nice flavour.
Right, yes, it comes through nutty, sort of round.
I would say it's fairly high in alcohol too.
Yes, it's getting up to 4% on. It's one of those popular. It's a very popular beer.
Yeah.
The other bitter outstrips it in sales. This is for the connoisseurs.
Yeah.
This is.
Well, it's very nice. Of course, the great thing that everybody knows about Young's is their wonderful sort of PRO logo or trademark, which is their Shire horses, isn't it?
That's right, Johnny. Yeah. The Shire horses still work. We've got teams that work, and we've got teams that we show. Persian horses, Suffolk punches, Shire horses.
Yeah.
Black and white beasts that pull drays loaded with beer around London.
And they still do that, don't they?
Yes, indeed. Yes, within a radius of the brewery of 3 miles, we still go out and deliver by Shire.
Yeah.
Slow old deliveries, but there you are.
Yeah, but they're cheaper than motor vehicles.
Indeed.
This is what they all say. That's what they all say.
That's it. Indeed. Yes. There is a story that the first load of oats that came through for the oatmeal stout, the head brewer was aware that there was a delivery due, but the head horseman hadn't been told, so he commandeered the first delivery of oatmeal oats down to the stables rather than to the brewery.
Oh, they nearly ate our beer.
They did indeed.
Talking of eating, the food at the Lamb, like the beer, is something special.
The unmistakable silhouette of the Tyne Bridge in Newcastle. Our next pub, the Crown Posada, sits in the shadow of this famous bridge on a street simply called Side, which leads down to the River Tyne. The Crown Posada dates back over 220 years and was given its name by a 19th century owner, a sea captain who had a wife in Spain and a mistress whom he installed at the Crown, as it was then called. He changed the name to the Crown Posada, Posada being the Spanish for inn. The pub is virtually unaltered since the 19th century and attracts a remarkable range of customers, united in their liking for good beer and a classic town pub in which to enjoy it.
The history of our next classic inn is closely associated with the abbey behind me. This great abbey in Dorchester, Oxfordshire, was a cathedral until the year 1070, and after the dissolution of the monasteries became the parish church. Only 3 buildings survived the dissolution. One was the church, the second was the monks' private guest house, now the museum. The third was the common hospice, built in 1450 and opened as an inn in 1540 and called the Gorge. For 150 years, coaches like this trundled along Dorchester High Street, making their overnight stops here at the Gorge. Its large courtyard and open gallery have provided for travellers ever since. The interior of the Gorge still retains its original character, and the hospitality hasn't changed much either. Excellent food is served not only in the bar, but also in the oldest part of the inn, which was originally the Abbey Brew House, but is now the main dining room. Having explored all the nooks and crannies of this historic inn, I'm having a cup of coffee with Michael Roberts, the manager. Hello, Michael. Hello. I imagine an ancient place like this must have some ghosts.
Yes, it does do actually. I have been told there's a few ghosts roaming about the hotel. I haven't actually seen anyone or heard of anything yet, but I'm always open to things. Some people have actually rung to say that, can we go in so-and-so room? We believe there's a ghost in there, so obviously we give them that room. But there's been a few people in the past who said they've seen a ghost, but as again, I haven't seen it, so I'm waiting, so perhaps in time.
You don't use it as a tourist attraction then?
Well, no, there is a guide actually which has been formed as regards ghosts, but we've actually been included in it. So yes, we are in it, but only about 3 or 4 people have asked.
Right. Do you get, talking of tourism, do you get many Americans staying here?
We get quite a few Americans actually. They love it because obviously in the States there's nothing like this there. So they're enthralled when they come through the door to see it's actually still an old inn with the beams and everything else. And a few of them have said, oh, you must take this to the States, you know, you'd be packed every single day. But yes, they love it because they love all the history and going across to the Abbey, and they enjoy the food and the atmosphere. So yes, we do get quite a lot of tourism, Americans especially.
Because of the proximity to Oxford, presumably?
Well, yes, it's so near. It's very historic around here as well. And with the Dorchester as it stands is very interesting. So we do quite well on tourism.
The very heart of Leeds. This is what Sir John Betjeman called our next classic pub, Whitelocks. The pub is situated in Turk's Head Yard off Brigate, one of Leeds' main shopping streets. Whitelocks, or its true name, Turk's Head, had its first licence granted in 1715, though the actual building dates back even further. The name Whitelocks comes from a family called Whitelock who held the licence for 90 years. In 1886, the bar and restaurant was altered into what it is today, a magnificent luncheon bar. Whitelocks was the first establishment in Leeds to have electricity and an electric clock, seen here in the restaurant. Whitelocks is superb, the most popular being the house speciality. 2 deliciously light Yorkshire puddings, awash on a sea of onion gravy. Delicious, but don't attempt to count the calories.
Welcome to the Great British Beer Festival. This is CAMRA's national campaigning event, and we're expecting over 40,000 thirsty drinkers through our doors in the 5 days that we're going to be open. And this hall really shows how successful CAMRA has been. In this hall there are over 300 different real ales from over 170 different breweries, and over half of those breweries didn't even exist when CAMRA was set up. Many of the most famous names in brewing that are here would have stopped brewing without CAMRA's campaign to make the customer ask for traditionally brewed real ale. This hall really shows what CAMRA has achieved.
Morning, sir.
Morning. Pint of AK, please.
Pint of AK, sir. Just arrived?
First beer.
Oh, well.
And it's one that I haven't heard of before.
Well, we always say here, start with the best, go round and do the rest, and come back to the best. There you are, sir. McMullen AK. Mate.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Cheers. What do you think?
Refreshing pint.
Good. Good, good. Temperature all right?
Temperature's all right, yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, okay. Malty pint.
Yes, it is malty, yeah. The big secret about McMullen Original AK is the maltiness. Very extravagant use of very fine malted barley from East Anglia, combined with a lovely balance of East Kent hops, gives it that lovely rich maltiness.
Well, the organiser of the Great British Beer Festival is Christine Crine. Chris, who works at the Great British Beer Festival?
Well, everyone really. If you go and look around the bars, you'll find company directors, you'll find clerks, you'll find bus drivers, you'll find everyone. They just come along to help for the week or even a few days, simply because they love beer. None of them are paid.
So what do they get for working?
Well, not a great deal, except for the fact that they contribute to the biggest beer festival in Britain, and the beer festival with the biggest choice of beers in the world.
And is it fun to work here?
Oh yeah, I mean, the atmosphere is here, and it's very much like a big working holiday camp. And people come back year after year after year to meet the people that they've not seen from one year to the next. It's just good fun.
Well, tell me, what is the typical visitor to the Great British Beer Festival?
There isn't. There really isn't. We get everyone from all sorts of walks of life, from upper class to lower class, you name it, we get them. And And we get young people, old people. Wander around the hall now, and you'll find there'll be people in suits, people in t-shirts, people in jeans, men and women. Because we believe that the way the beer drinking industry is going, there are a lot more women involved in brewing, and there's also a lot more women involved in drinking. We get a lot of hen parties here during the week. It's good fun to go and have a few drinks with them.
Thank you, Chris. Well, the Great British Beer Festival is just one of 120 beer festivals that CAMRA runs, and I really think that this is the most interesting, exciting sort of campaigning we do, because it shows just how much success we've had, so as people to have a good time, and at the end of the day it shows why CAMRA is still needed. Cheers. Cheers.
To see all the traditional beers coming back. I was here a few years ago, 7 years ago, and they were much harder to find, and it's really nice to go into every pub and find
fighting back against the lager market where there was the balance of the lager growth. It is now balancing back the other way, and the traditional beers are holding and making a good comeback again.
Well, I think it's great, and I'm doing all I can to support it.
Well done.
I'll tell you that.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So what is CAMRA? Well, I think the most important thing to realise is that we're a drinkers' organisation. We have 45,000 individual members, each of whom pays an annual fee to join. We're not funded by the brewers, and brewers and pub retailing companies aren't members of CAMRA. We campaign on anything to do with the traditional pub or British beer. We're campaigning for longer licensing hours, for example, more information about what goes into your beer, allowing children into suitable pubs, and of course the big campaign, which is just to ensure the continued independence of our traditional breweries and the beers that they produce. All our money comes from our members or from membership activity. So, for example, the membership fee, our 120 beer festivals that we run every year, and of course publications such as the best-selling Good Beer Guide. So CAMRA is a campaign. It's about getting the message across, but it's also a social organisation with a wide variety of branch activities, and even working at a festival like this is great fun. It's one of the things that make us a fast-growing consumer organisation.
In the peaceful Scottish village of Canonby, 2 miles from the English border, is the Riverside Inn. Purchased as a private house in 1974, the Riverside has been converted over the years to become an award-winning place in which to eat, drink and stay. The Riverside is quite outstanding. Proprietors are first-class chefs who create gourmet dishes using local fresh produce. Also, the substantial bar food varies from homemade soups and pâtés to imaginatively prepared fish and meat dishes. The Riverside Inn pays exceptional attention to detail, and if it's a relaxed atmosphere you desire, then this is certainly the place to be.
Well, here I am. And I don't really know where I am. All I know is I'm somewhere near Petersfield in Hampshire. And I don't know where I am because this pub hasn't got a name. It's known as the pub without a name. It's a lovely pub, and it's got a wonderful dew pond here with trees. So why is the pub without a name? Well, it is said that when the Napoleonic Wars started, they moved the road. The road once ran along there, and they moved it around the back, and so it was left isolated in the middle of nowhere, and it was left alone, and it's known as the pub without a name. But some people know where it is. A lot of people come here, whether they remember the way back or whether they remember the way here again, I don't know. So let's go and have a look at the pub without a name and see what we find. It's not only a pub without a name, it is also a pub that's never changed. Everything about the two small bars of this pub is genuine, from the atmosphere to the decor. I was joined at the bar by Carola Brown, who owns Ballard's Brewery and supplies the pub with Ballard's piss beer. And it's a very beautiful pint, isn't it?
I enjoy it.
Yeah, it's not too heavy. Cara, you know, it's a small brewery, but I understand you've got quite a large range of beers, haven't you?
Well, we do 5 draft beers, in fact. We do, this one is the best seller, the best bitter. The other 2 most popular ones are Wassail, which is 6%. And then we do a session bitter called Trotton Bitter, which is 3.6%, which is also very good. It's very well flavoured for that strength of beer. And we do a mild, and another one in the middle of the range called Wild, which is a dark bitter, so that's fairly unusual.
Cathedral, and nearby our next pub, the Philharmonic, could well be regarded as a cathedral among pubs. The Philharmonic, built by Walter Thomas, was designed to be something of a prestige house, and for this reason no efforts were spared in recruiting specialists in artistic design from around the world. The excellence of the internal finishing is typified by the joinery work, which was carried out by craftsmen whose normal occupation was the fitting out of the luxurious transatlantic liners, and who turned to pub interiors when laid off from ship fitting. Even the gents' toilet, so I'm reliably informed, is a work of art.
And another one there, look at that, you see? I'm an expert at this. This is a splendid game. It's a pity it's not more common these days. It really epitomises this particular pub, which is the Bell Inn at Aldworth. Ah! 3 there, look at that, 3 out of 5. In an ideal world, every pub should have superb atmosphere, marvellous ale and first-class licensees. And at the Bell they have all 3. Landlord Ian Macaulay, known as Jack, is a phlegmatic, pipe-smoking presence in the central hatch servery. I spoke to Jack about the award-winning Murrell's Mild that he serves at the Bell.
3, 11.
You keep this Murrell's Mild well?
Not bad. It's very popular.
Good, yeah, there's a pity more pubs around here don't do mild. It's very thin on the ground in the south.
I don't know why they don't. It's a champion mild, won the championship in 1992. I say sales are good. You've got to keep it moving.
Yeah, no, it's very nice, very nice. I was reading a book about the history of the brewery the other day. Apparently they've been going in Oxford now for about 250 years.
Yeah. I think they've always done a mild, and it was in a decline for a while. But making a comeback, it's very odd. You can't get much of it in Oxford. That's the funny thing to me.
But this is excellent. It's got a lovely nutty, roasty, chocolatey taste, and it really slips down.
And no mean strength.
Ooh.
Yeah. 1037.
Goes jolly well with your lovely food.
Yeah, well, it seems to be popular.
I'll have another one, I think, please.
Another one. Let's go for it. Tomorrow.
One of the joys of a simple village pub like the Bell is that they do good, simple food. There's no restaurant doing a large range of cooked meals, but instead they have crusty rolls with fillings like salt beef, cheddar cheese, home-cooked ham, smoked salmon, and my favourite, which is turkey and brandy pâté. The gents' toilet here at the Bell is somewhat different from those at the Philharmonic. It's open to the stars, so you can stand in there and contemplate the universe and the meaning of life. In fact, Jack refers to it as the planetarium. A classic pub such as the Bell wouldn't be complete without our feathered friends here. In fact, I think this is one of the finest alehouses in the country, and it's not surprising that it won CAMRA's Pub of the Year award in 1991. Come on, goose, 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 goose.
Windows of our next pub, the Old Black Boy in Hull, look out onto the narrow winding high street as they have done since 1331. It appears to have been popular with the local people for a variety of reasons, having been a corn merchant's, a gin shop, a coffee house, a tobacco and snuff merchant's, and even a brothel. Today it has become a classic town pub, possessing great atmosphere and good beer. The public bar to the rear of the pub is decorated with handbills and prints about the slave trade, and to one of Hull's most famous native sons, William Wilberforce, who did more than anyone to outlaw the slave trade from England. Upstairs are two further rooms where the pub's celebrated steak and ale pies are consumed. The name originates from a tobacconist on the site who used a young African as a doorboy, although some say the name relates to the slave markets held in the High Street.
There's nothing like a river to slow you down. The gentle movement of this lovely, tranquil bit of the River Thames, the graceful willow trees in the background, just in front of the bridge at the back. The new bridge. Well, it's not a very new bridge. It was built in the 14th century. But of course, this has always been a popular crossing place for centuries. And naturally, a pub had to be built here at some time. And the Rose Revived was built in the 17th century, probably a lot of it before that has disappeared now. But it's a very busy place, and it attracts a lot of visitors during the summer, several hundreds every day. The Rose Revived at Newbridge. The Rose Revived is now considerably bigger than it was in days of old. In those days, it was just called the Rose. And then it got altered to the Rose and Crown. And then in 1919, a gentleman from the Royal Academy, Alfred Parsons, painted a new sign, and it was called the Rose Revived. I was lucky enough to bump into Mark Bishop from Aven Brewery, who offered me a pint of speckled hen. Or was I to refuse? Cheers. Well, it has a very original flavour, hasn't it?
It's quite a distinctive flavour. Moreland's beers tend to throw quite a dry flavour.
Yeah.
And when you combine a dry flavour we have with a strong beer, which tends to give quite a sweet flavour, you get a nice, well-rounded balance of flavours there.
What's the percentage of this?
It's 5.2% ABV, 1050 original gravity. The 1050 comes from the 50th year of the
That's a pretty strong beer, isn't it?
It is, yes.
I mean, I can't tell now, but by the time I get there, I'll know, won't I? Shall we get there?
Let's give it a try.
The Garden Gate in Hunslet Leeds is a late Victorian town pub with a magnificent terracotta-faced frontage and etched windows. This fascinating pub has a central corridor from which leads 4 distinct drinking places. In fact, the corridor is as popular as the rooms. The vault at the front of the pub has probably the best bar front in the world, on top of which emanates the landlord's favourite tunes from the cash register. The Garden Gate combines all that is best about the northern character. It's warm, earthy, no nonsense, and has no pretensions.
Manchester, home of the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, is second only to Burton-on-Trent as a centre for brewing in Britain. There are still a number of highly successful traditional ale breweries in and around Manchester, and of these, the biggest by far is Boddington's. The brewery is situated on the outskirts of the city centre, next to the infamous Strangeways prison. I've arranged to meet Patrick Langan, who is marketing manager for Boddington's Bitter, to find out why the name Boddington's is synonymous with Manchester. Patrick, this is a rather enjoyable place to stand and talk with all this lovely beer around us, isn't it? I believe Boddington's have a pretty long history as an independent family brewery.
Yes, we've been brewing on this site at Strangeways in Manchester since 1778. Henry Boddington became involved, the first Boddington involved in the brewery, in 1838, and from 1838 through to 1989 the Boddington family was heavily involved, and it was in 1989 that the Boddington family decided to sell the brand and the brewery to Whitbreads.
And how have the policies of the brewery changed since Whitbread took over?
Well, but we're very concerned in when they acquired Boddington's Brewery and the brand, to maintain all that's good about Boddington's, and so that very little has actually changed in terms of the brewing process or the ingredients that we use or the way in which we brew the beer. What has changed, though, is the ability to market the brand more widely in the UK and elsewhere. And over the years, we've had a very successful marketing campaign for Boddington's, which has taken it from being a regional brewer to being one of the national brands in the UK.
Yes, and I believe you're now starting to notch up worldwide sales of your beers, mainly through the draft flow can.
Yes, the success of Boddington's in the UK, both in the on-trade, in the pub trade, and in the take-home trade, has stimulated interest around the world for Boddington's. And we found that Boddington's is now being introduced into many countries in the world, USA, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, where the desire for something new and different, but also the desire for something that's got heritage and integrity, a brand like Boddington's, is very strong. And so we're finding a lot of interest amongst consumers worldwide for Boddington's.
Good. Well, as this is my first visit here, I'd like to have a look round and then sample some of your beer.
You're more than welcome to. We have Paul Buttrick, our head brewer here, who will take you round.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Welcome to Boddington. Yes, it's nice to be here. You've got something interesting to show me, I believe.
Yes, we have a wonderful traditional brewery, and if you'd like to join us, we'll start our tour.
Good. Have I got to put that on? At Boddington's, only the finest natural ingredients are used, starting here in the mill room, where light-coloured malt is ground into grist. The grist is mashed with brewing water from a well 200 feet beneath the brewery. Steamy stuff. In the mash tuns, extract from the grain, the wort, is run off into underbacks before being pumped into boiling vessels known as coppers. Next, the aromatic hop room. Some brewers, both large and small, use pellets, but at Boddington's they use whole English seeded hops, just like they did over 200 years ago. These are added in the copper room, where stainless steel stands side by side with traditional coppers. The hops give Boddington's its characteristically slightly bitter flavour and aroma. There are 39 fermenting vessels in the brewery. This one can hold 480 barrels. That's nearly 140,000 pints. Fermentation takes place over the next 7 days, during which a thick creamy yeast head forms on top of the beer. The fully automated racking hall is the final noisy stage of Boddington's brewing process. Finings are added to clarify the beer in the casks as they are filled. The casks are labelled and stacked, ready for delivery to over 8,000 stockists throughout the UK. And now for something completely delicious. This is Boddington's famous bitter. It's called the Cream of Manchester from its thick white head. It's also the most beautiful pale golden colour. And it tastes very good too.
Cheers.
Cheers, Paul. What is it gives it that beautiful pale gold colour?
I think it's the malt we use in Boddington's is an English pale ale malt, which is specially malted to give the light golden colour. We think it's unique to Boddington's bitter. The other characteristic that gives it its flavour is we use English whole aroma hops, Fuggles and Goldings, which give it a very subtle hoppy taste. I think the other thing that's very, very important is our own Boddington's yeast strain, which gives it that sort of moorish flavour. As you've seen in the fermentation areas, it gives a wonderful, wonderful aroma, and you can actually taste that coming out in the beer.
Beautiful, rich, fruity.
I've been told that the sun does shine on Manchester, just not today. And in weather like this, the best place to be is in the Peveril of the Peak in Great Bridgewater Street. The Pev, as it's affectionately known, takes its name from a famous stagecoach and epitomises a truly classic pub. The old-fashioned small-roomed layout in this friendly, homely pub has 3 separate rooms opening off the central servery with various hatches and counters. It's a rarity to find a bar football table in pubs. This one in the Pev is over 40 years old, and who said that footballers should retire at 35? The stained glass is all original, but when the present proprietors took over the pub, they had to remove 18 coats of paint to reveal the surrounding mahogany.
You can tell by the presence of Friar Tuck here that we're in Nottingham, sitting in front of Ye Old Trip to Jerusalem, which is reputed to be one of the oldest pubs in the country. It's actually hewn out of the sandstone rock on which stands Nottingham Castle, where Tuck's colleague Robin Hood was always at odds with the sheriff. I joined the landlord and landlady of this fascinating pub in the upstairs bar. Now, Patrick and Marilyn, this pub is often claimed to be the oldest in the country. What's the evidence for that?
Well, the Normans came here, they captured Nottingham in 1068. The Normans have a history of brewing ale, so they immediately set about brewing ale. Also, the water wasn't fit to drink, so they needed something that was sterile, and brewed ale is a sterile liquid. So the fact that they were brewing ale in this vicinity, in these caves,
one can assume that they started to sell it to the locals, therefore it became a pub in somewhere around about 1070s, 1080s.
Yeah. And the caves that you mention, of course, are quite extensive and very old, aren't they, under this rock?
Yes. The rocks are 250 million years old, and there's evidence that people were living in some of these caves 3,000 years ago, as Nottingham itself has over 500 cave systems.
I noticed this galleon up here is completely covered with cobwebs and doesn't look as if it's ever been cleaned. Why is that?
It is cursed. They say whoever cleans it dies an unexpected and mysterious death within a year, and the last 3 people who have cleaned it have all died within the year.
Really?
And we think it's about 50 years since it has been cleaned. So we often have a little joke with the wives, if they would like the husbands to clean it, as long as the insurance policy is paid up.
There are 2 of these clefts in the trip, stretching 60 feet up into the castle rock. The one downstairs has been used as a chimney for many years, and the last time it was swept, 7.5 tons of soot were taken away. I'm off to the cellars now, which they say used to be used as a condemned cell, so I shan't stay too long. These caves underneath the pub are ideal for keeping beer at a good even temperature and have probably been doing that for well over 900 years. But in fact this area here was in Norman times a pit for cockfighting. An ancient pub and an ancient game, ringing the bull.
The Cock and Bottle in Morden near Wareham has been chosen not only because it's a classic village pub, but also for the way it's been extended without spoiling its original charm. From the road, the frontage is entirely 19th century, but behind half of this facade lies a new extension. I asked David Woodhouse from Hall & Woodhouse, who own the pub, how they went about extending a classic pub.
The Cock and Bottle has been a successful pub for many years, and it became clear during the 80s as the drive-out food trade developed from Poole and Bournemouth that there lay an opportunity here at the Cock and Bottle. And in assessing the alteration, I think it was one of our prime objectives was to maintain the character of the pub. It's a super old public bar, this in which I'm sitting here, and it was something that we really didn't want to lose. And there's a lot of older local people that use it, and I think in any pub alteration, there's quite often that perhaps the character of these old pubs are lost, and therefore the extension has been based on the fact of actually keeping this exactly as it is. And we haven't changed this room in one iota, but we've managed to extend on the side a significant area primarily for food, which is very much part of the core business now, adjacent next door. And then in our extension, we use sympathetic materials to extend and hopefully end up with a situation that makes the pub look as old in the new bit as it does in the old bit. And that's really been the basis of the development.
The Gorge in Southwark is a taste of London as it used to be when Henry VIII reigned while Drake was still sailing around the world. The inn as it now stands is about a quarter of its size when rebuilt to the original plans in 1677 after the Great Fire of Southwark. The Gorge is in fact the only coaching inn in London to survive intact, with its tiers of open galleries looking down on the cobbled courtyard. These days it's carefully preserved by the National Trust. The dining rooms above the ground floor bars were once the old bedrooms of the Gorge.
This magnificent bar in the Princess Louise pub in Holborn is 14 yards long. Now, Princess Louise was the fourth daughter of Queen Victoria, and she lived to the grand old age of 91. This pub has outlived her, and so it should. And I hope it'll go on living here with all its wonderful decoration for a long time. It is believed the excellent quality of the workmanship is all down to Italian craftsmen who were brought across to London during Victoria's reign to use their skills on building and decorating the many palaces and churches during this period. As a Grade 2 listed building, the preservation will allow the pub to remain as it is for at least 100 years. Even the gents' toilets cannot be modernized. They are in fact separately listed.
This is the Billersley in King's Heath, Birmingham. There's been a public house on this site for well over 100 years. The present pub was built in 1929 and its claim to fame is theatre.
Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more! Or close the wall up with our English dead! In peace, there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of the tiger. Stiffen the sinews, summon up the blood, disguise fair nature with hard-favoured rage. Then the eye a terrible aspect. Now set the teeth and stretch the nostrils wide. Hold hard the breath and bend up every spirit to its full height. On, you
It's not often that you have a performance of Henry V in your local pub. But here at the Billersley in King's Heath, Birmingham, pub theatre is a way of life. Theatre probably originated from the British pub. Performers had a ready-made audience with which to impress. It's worth noting that a certain William Shakespeare began his career from a pub.
In the 19th century, the railways changed our way of life. It provided employment for railway workers who needed somewhere for refreshment. Our next pub, the Brunswick Inn in Derby, satisfied those needs and became the world's first purpose-built railway hostelry. Today is the first day of the Brunswick Inn's Beer Festival, and although it's not yet 11 o'clock in the morning, like the railwaymen of the past, I feel a thirst coming on. No, this is not a raid by plain-clothed police. There's a tradition here at the Brunswick Inn that the first customers for their annual beer festival come in through this window. And who can blame them with all this delicious ale waiting to be sampled? Go on. You next?
You wait then. Come on then.
Come on then. You're a bit young for this, aren't you?
What's all you coming?
Thank you. Trevor Harris, the landlord here at the Brunswick Inn, has assembled half a dozen beers for me to sample. 3 of them from commercial breweries and 3 of them brewed here on the premises. And what's this one?
That's the Daleside Legover.
Daleside Legover. Oh, it's a nice malty one, isn't it? Very nice malty one.
Do you know much about the Daleside Brewery?
Well, I believe it was started in 1988 as the Big N Brewery, and then they moved to Harrogate in North Yorkshire in 1992 and changed their name. Unfortunately, I don't believe their beers are sold outside a 100-mile radius of the brewery, which is a great pity because I think this would go down very well in the south. Yes, it's very good. So that's Daleside, and this is one of your own brews, isn't it? This is...
That's our Festival Ale.
Festival Ale. And that's a much drier taste than that, isn't it?
Well hopped, very hopped.
Very well hopped, yes. And this is the well-known Marston's Pedigree, I believe, is it?
That's true.
Oh, that's a classic English ale, isn't it? What do you suppose gives it that really distinctive flavour?
I think it comes from the fact that Marston's are the only brewery in the world employing the union system of fermentation. The system centres around fermentation in oak casks or unions as opposed to the conventional metal vessels. The unions allow the yeast to function in what it would regard the normal way. This enables Marston's to use their own strain of yeast and gives a distinctive quality and taste to their brands.
And this is this the one? This is not Old Abusive, is it?
No, this is our second brew.
Second brew. That's it's nice and malty. It's not anywhere near as hoppy as the Festival Ale.
A definite malty tipple.
And the gravity?
That's 1042.
Ah. Very nice, yes. Yes. Right, now we're on to my favourite beer, which is porter. This is
Which one's this? Is Town's Pinot Porter, is it? Where's that brewed?
In Chesterfield.
Chesterfield, so just up the road, as it were.
That's right, and it's being launched today.
Oh, there's a real roasty odour to that. Fruity and chocolatey.
Yes, yeah, very nice.
Very nice, very nice. And this is your own railway porter.
That's right.
I suppose that's an inevitable pun, isn't it? A lovely head on that. That's retained its head better than all the other beers. That's a nice, smooth, chocolatey taste to that, isn't it?
Fully flavoured beer.
Yes, I can feel it doing a lot of good as it goes down, actually. It's lovely. Very nice indeed.
The Mitre Bar in Brunswick Street, Glasgow is an example of how a pub can be regarded as classic purely on its atmosphere and beer, as landlord Jerry Feathers explains.
The Mitre Bar, the building itself goes back to 1712, but the first licence was actually granted in 1866. And initially the bar was, as you see it just now, very, very small bar. The clientele in here are very, very mixed. We get them from, you know, just bordering on eligible to drink right through to some of the older clientele, some of the ones at my back here actually. A very, very cross-section of the community. We have professional people, we have blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, unemployed, political parties. We've got a lot of the prominent front-bench MPs drinking here on a Friday night. So the Mitre, as I say, is it's a place where you can come, and if you want some stimulating conversation, it's available. If you want to sit and read your paper, there's no problem. We do some entertainment at the weekends upstairs in the lounge. We have a fair selection of ales available. As you can see, for such a small bar, there's quite a selection of different ales, as well as lagers, beers, Belgian beers we import, German beers. So you're never stuck for choice in the Mitre.
Yes, as I get a little bit older, I find I can manage a pint, whereas before I used to have 2 halves. I found a pint a bit off-putting.
Bigger capacity, are you? You're 5 seconds.
Okay. Well, there you have it. 30 fascinating pubs, all wonderful, but in different ways. Johnny, is it possible for you to actually pick one out and say, well, that's my favourite?
Well, my favourite out of the 7 that I went to was most certainly the Princess Louise in the City of London in Holborn, because this is purely a nostalgic thing. I mean, it's a Victorian pub, and I would say it's 95% genuine, because I came in at the end of that period, early this century, and those pubs were still about, and there was that wonderful bar, a horseshoe bar, 14 yards long, and all these beautiful engraved crystal mirrors around the tiling, and the gents' lavatory has got a preservation order on it. Would you believe it? The Princess Louise for me.
Lovely.
Right. Now, I think I know yours, but you tell me. And
Well, I like lots of pubs, and I thought that the trip to Jerusalem is a fabulous place, carved out of the rock, probably one of the oldest pubs in the country. And I love the George at Dorchester, a lovely old elegant coaching inn that's seen its ups and downs throughout history. But yes, you're right. I think my favourite is the Bell at Aldworth. It's a superb village pub. It has just about everything going for it, including an absolutely wonderful landlord and landlady. That's my favourite.
Right.
And what about you? What's your favourite?
Well, I'm actually going to be a little bit cheeky, because the producers tell me there's just time to squeeze one more in and make it 31. And I think that's quite right, because my favourite is, in fact, the smallest pub in the country. Measuring just 6 16 feet by 7.5, it's hard to imagine a smaller pub than the Nutshell in Bury St Edmunds, although 101 people and a dog once squeezed in. The pub began life as a beer house in 1873, and the landlord at that time, John Stebbing, stacked the Nutshell full of antiquities and was possibly unique at that time in claiming to be both a public house and a museum. Today, sadly, most of the earliest curiosities have long since disappeared, but one famous relic which has adorned the Nutshell for over 100 years is the grisly remains of a mummified cat. Known as a witch's cat, the animal was reputed to have been walled up alive to ward off evil spirits. The real reason the poor animal is hung from the ceiling is to demonstrate that there is enough room in this pub to swing a cat, but only just.